What's up? Back here at the Fredericksburg Battlefield Park. I'm on the southern end of the battlefield, Stonewall Jackson's line, and I'm going to be checking out some of the key spots. I'm going to take a walk down Bernard Cabin Trail. I'm going to check out the Mead Breakthrough with the Meade Pyramid, and then go check out Prospect Hill. And if I have time, I'll go a little further and check out Hamilton's Crossing. So yeah, I'm going to walk this trail. It's about 0.6 miles to the site of Bernard's cabins, the slave cabins, to the Mansfield Plantation, which was owned by Arthur Bernard. Mansfield Plantation, I don't know, mile and a half that way. And yeah, first off, you can see these earthworks, the entrenchments built, and these things go on for miles. And I'm here off of Lee Drive, which is loosely based on the supply road. That at the time of the Civil War, it was just pretty much a wide trail used to move troops, like I say, used for supplies, and used to contact Robert E. Lee, who was up on Telegraph Hill, which is now Lee's Hill, which is 4 or 5 miles that way. And this road actually goes back to the colonial era. It was originally the Massaponax Road. So yeah, it's gonna be a bit muddy back here, but here you go. And they say there are earthworks to check out along the way, so go. And there are some trees falling over. All right, really haven't seen any earthworks yet, but while I'm walking, I'll give you a quick recap of how this thing got started. See, newly appointed Union General Burnside had marched his giant 130-man army down here to Fredericksburg. Couldn't cross the Rappahannock because his pontoon bridges hadn't arrived, so he had to sit in Stafford for 10 plus days before he could cross. And that gave Robert E. Lee time to fortify up at Maurice Heights. And more importantly, it gave Stonewall Jackson time to come all the way down from the Shenandoah Valley. So down here on the southern portion. Yeah, thinking about coming out here, I'd wait a little while. This trail is pretty covered up. Yeah, so, and Stonewall's Jackson line initially had 4 divisions that extended about 18 miles going all the way down to Port Royal. But once he figured out the Union's line of attack, he called his two most southern divisions up here. And the 2 divisions that you're really going to want to know about, first of all, would be A.P. Hill, who was up front. And then Jubal Early, who was kind of behind, a little to the south. And then A.P. Hill had 2 brigades that you're going to want to know about. In front of us, he had Lane's brigade out of North Carolina. Just a side note, they're the ones who happened to accidentally kill Stonewall Jackson in Chancellorsville 5 months later. And then 600 plus yards to the south, you had Archer's brigade. And A.P. Hill had allowed a 600-yard gap in between in a really wooded, swampy area he thought was impenetrable. And Stonewall Jackson, as good of a general as he was, he agreed to this. So, and yeah, that's of course going to come into play later. All right, here we are. This is the site of Bernard's cabins up here. This rising ahead is known as Latimer's Knoll, and originally 3 to 4 slave cabins, a little slave community, about 35 plus slaves lived here. And this is the site, one of the 2 main sites of the Confederate artillery. There were 9 guns stationed up on this little rising. And then the second artillery position would be Prospect Hill, I don't know, a mile or so as going south. And yeah, they set up to create kind of a crossfire and to also cover that big gap I had told you that was between these two brigades here. Coming out here so many times, you realize how big this battlefield is. And before I get started on that, let me just kind of break down the Union line. So the entire southern portion of their battlefield was run by Grand Division General Franklin. And yeah, they had many chains of command because their army had gotten so bloated. And under him, he had 2 corps. He had the 1st Corps, which was run by General Reynolds. That's the one we're going to kind of want to know about. And then there's also the 6th Corps run by General Smith. On the other side, there's a Shannon Airport in front of my finger. They were kind of sort of in reserve behind that. And they didn't see much action until kind of later in the day. And yeah, so under General Reynolds, he had 3 divisions. All right, so he had Gibbon's division, and that was on the other side of those trees. That's the site of the slaughter pen farm. Did a video on that about a month ago. So about a half a mile south of that was Meade's division in front of the Smithfield plantation. Then you go another half mile or so south, you're going to have Abner Doubleday's division. He didn't see too much action other than early in the day he had a skirmish with Major John Pelham, that famous artillery assault. Did a video on that a week or 2 ago. Yeah, so yeah, it's going to explain the Union side of the field. And as I said earlier, the Confederate brigade, Lane's brigade down here out of North Carolina, they were probably slightly to the right, maybe just kind of where these trees are starting on the side of the railroad tracks. So, all right, so here we go. So as I said, Gibbon's Union division right here, he had 3 brigades. His 1st brigade, Taylor, came forward. They were quickly repulsed. Then he sent a 2nd brigade forward by General Lyle. He fared a little bit better, but eventually was repulsed. So then finally he had sent a Roots division that was also mixed in with fragments of the Taylors and Lyle. Pushed them before, and they were a little bit successful. They did cross the railroad tracks. Lane's brigade, Confederate brigade, at this time was running low on ammunition. So was Roots. So there was a lot of heavy hand-to-hand fighting, and it's starting to sleet. All right, so a lot of heavy hand-to-hand fighting, and then eventually Pender's brigade, Confederate brigade, came down to help out in reserve. And then also there was a Thomas brigade came down, and they stood up to the right of Lane's brigade out of Georgia, and they were able to push Roots brigade and Gibbons back. So that kind of ended the skirmish on this end of the fighting. And like I say, Thomas's brigade did make a slight counterattack, but they were eventually repulsed. So yeah, so that's it for the fighting on this little portion of the battlefield. So now I'm going to walk back this trail, go back to this little supply road, go on down, and visit the Mead Breakthrough right here. So, all right. Okay, so I drove down about 3/4 of a mile. I'm at the site of Mead's Breakthrough. Although I'm just going to stop here for a minute, take a look at these plaques, because you've got a better view of everything around the bend here on the other side of these trees. Maybe, I don't know, about 1/4 of a mile. And yeah, so in front of us is that 600-yard gap I had told you that was between Lane's brigade and Archer's brigade. The really swampy, thickly forested section here that extends maybe about 500 yards in front of us. These trees extend just beyond the railroad tracks. And this is where 2 of 3 of Meade's brigades had begun marching forward. And yeah, this is the site of the death of Maxcy Gregg. He had a South Carolina brigade back here in reserve. So yeah, Lane to the left in front of the Bernard's cabins. In front of Prospect Hill, you had Archer. And so Maxcy Gregg was back here. And they thought that the Union soldiers coming forward were actually retreating Confederate soldiers. So they kind of didn't pay much mind until it was too late. And then Maxcy Gregg, he caught a bullet in the spine, died 2 days later. So yeah, and if you remember, I don't know if you watch Gods and Generals, he was portrayed, he famously didn't get along with Stonewall Jackson. He was a politician out of South Carolina, and he was really kind of one of the hardcore pro-slavery guys, kind of in the Nathan Bedford Forrest vein, I guess, kind of. And over here's kind of a famous painting. You'll see this a lot. And this painting depicts the action after the Confederates had repulsed Meade and Gibbons, and they made a kind of a small countercharge. And this is the 114th Pennsylvania Reserves, and with their famous kind of Santa Claus looking uniforms. And these are based off of French army uniforms they used in North Africa. So anyway, so I'm going to go a little further down and take a look at the breakthrough. Okay, made it. Came down that quarter of a mile to the other side of these trees here to take a look at Mead's Breakthrough. And down there is the Meade Pyramid. And the pyramid was actually built in remembrance of Confederate soldiers. The story with that goes, back in 1897, the Confederate Memorial Literary Society had approached the railroad, asked if the railroad could put up signs just letting passengers know that they were passing through the Fredericksburg battlefield. And the directors of the railroad actually wanted to do one better. They wanted to set up a memorial. So they had this pyramid built. And the pyramid is based on it's modeled after the pyramid down at the Hollywood Cemetery down in Richmond. Yeah, anyway, so the site of Meade's advancement, the story on that is up here you've got Prospect Hill, second site of the Confederate artillery, and down below is Archer's Brigade. And this is the beginning of that 600-yard gap I keep mentioning. And so Meade had marched forward with his 3 brigades. He had Jackson brigades, which pretty much came head on and began fighting with Archer. And then Sinclair, and behind him was a Magleton brigade. They began marching forward. They were surprised that nobody was firing back, so they kept advancing forward, and they marched into that boggy area. Ended up coming around and flanking Archer, helping Jackson out. And so Archer's brigade right here was made up of 5 regiments. To the left, you had a Georgia, I think the Georgia 19th. You had 3 Tennessee regiments in the middle, and to the right, you had an Alabama regiment. Sinclair had wrapped around, and they had actually captured the flag. It was the only colors that were captured during the battle of the Georgia regiment. And then after that, the Tennessee regiment began to flee because they were pretty much surrounded. And the story goes that the 3rd Tennessee regiment in the middle was upset with their cowardice, and maybe they kind of like left them hanging. They actually began to fire on their own soldiers on purpose. So anyway, but eventually all of Archer's brigade were pushed back, and Meade began to advance. And at this point, General Meade was on the other side of the railroad tracks, and he didn't even realize that some skirmishers had made it all the way up to the military road. And so Meade, realizing that he was running low on ammunition, he had made his big breakthrough, had sent a courier back to the line to a General Birney requesting reinforcements. General Birney denied the request because Meade was breaking ranks. Birney was in a division that was under a different corps, that was under a different grand division. So he denied the request. Meade had sent back a second courier to no avail. Eventually Meade went back himself, laid into him, told him to begin moving forward, but by then it was too late. So by this time, all 3 of the Union brigades leaders had gone down. General Jackson was shot and killed, shot in the head. Sinclair had somehow hurt his ankle. And then the Magleton, who I had mentioned, his horse was shot and killed underneath him, fell on top of him. He was pinned down for 20 minutes. So, and then after that, Confederates had sent in reinforcements. And just to make a long story short, I can tell you mainly that a brigade led by Walker came down and pretty much mowed through everybody, pushing all of Meade's troops back across the railroad track. Also, there was an Atkinson's brigade that came down as well, and they eventually made a small counterattack that was eventually repulsed. So, yeah, that's kind of the story on Meade Breakthrough there. And a couple things I'll mention is that one of the regimental leaders down there underneath of Meade was the grandfather of actor Jimmy Stewart from It's a Wonderful Life fame. Thought that was kind of neat. Anyway, I'm going to walk up, take a look at the pyramid. At the time, there was just one line here, the RF&B tracks. As I said, 24 feet high, 400 tons. And this plot of land was actually donated by the Pratts, and they were the owners of Smithfield Plantation at the time, which is maybe a mile, 3/4 of a mile that way. And outside those trees now, there's a big industrial park that's been built, and the slaughter pen farm is kind of that way. So yeah, here it is, a little bit overgrown. But crazy, this thing's been here for over about 125 years. Yeah, very overgrown over here. All right, well, that's the Meade Pyramid, and I'm gonna walk over to Prospect Hill. All right, made it up here on Prospect Hill. And real quick, to let anybody know who maybe is thinking about coming out, that behind the parking lot, there's this Lee Drive walking trail, 2.5 mile trail. It wraps around, it connects with this Lee Drive. And to let you know, it doesn't loop, so you'd have to come back via the road or turn around and walk back up the trail. Yeah, this Spotsylvania, Fredericksburg area, hotbed of battlefields. And once you cross over into Orange County, you've got Battle of the Wilderness, Battle of Chancellorsville, Spotsylvania Courthouse, and of course, Battle of Fredericksburg. Here we are, Jackson's Line. Like I say, I started out Bernard's Cabins, the Mead Breakthrough. Right here, I'm on Prospect Hill. And I think I'm gonna walk down to this Hamilton's crossing. It's a little more than a 1/2 mile trail. Get down to it, and over here, that Major John Pelham's Corner. Did a video on that a little over a week ago. So, all right, I always like to point these out when I see them, these old markers dating back to 1903. And they were placed here by a Confederate veteran, a guy named James Power Smith, and he was a staff officer under Stonewall Jackson. And he was also son-in-law to the Lacey family, the ones who had owned Chatham Manor at the time of the war. So this compass over here, and let's see, Richmond 51 miles to the south, of course DC 52 miles to the north, and Port Royal 16 miles that way. So you've got 14 guns up here, led by Lieutenant Colonel Reuben Walker. And they were to support the Archers Brigade that I keep mentioning down at the bottom of the hill there. So, yeah, you're not supposed to really walk on these earthworks. I guess this is kind of flat here. But, yeah, they'd be placed in these things, this kind of like horseshoe-shaped mound. They're called lunettes. It's a French word for half moon. They were dug that way so they could easily pull the cannons out if need be. So, all right, and this hill was also, it was nicknamed Dead Horse Hill. The story with that is about 11 a.m. is when the Union Army began firing, and they had their artillery set up mostly on the Stafford Heights on the other side of the Rappahannock, about a mile in front of us. And they didn't know the exact location of the Confederate line, so they were aiming high, and they fired. Most of the shells had landed behind us, hitting the reserves, killing a bunch of horses. So that's where the nickname comes from. So, yeah, so when the Union Army began firing, the Confederates actually held their fire. They didn't want to give away their position. They also were trying to preserve ammunition. So they had previously set up markers about 800 yards in front of us. I know they had a dead tree a little ways in front of us. There are also the remains of the Bernard caretaker's cottage that they had previously burned down. The chimney was still sticking up. And so that once the Union had crossed those markers, that's when the Confederate artillery opened up. And once the Confederate artillery opened up, that gave away their position. So now the Union Army had something to aim at. So now shells began raining down. And kind of a notable incident, at this time, a lot of the Confederate cannoneers began to flee into the woods. And so this guy, Battery Commander Captain Willie Pegram, he had wrapped himself in a Confederate flag, and he had casually marched along the cannons. and to kind of guilt the cannoneers into coming back. So yeah, anyway, so yeah, that's kind of the story here for Prospect Hill. And yeah, I'm gonna take a quick walk down to Hamilton's Crossing. So I'm gonna take a walk down. Like I say, it's about a little more than a half a mile. And Hamilton's Crossing, it became the train depot during the war because the Confederate Army had taken down the railroad bridge crossing the Rappahannock. So it's as far north as the trains could come. And yeah, it was a pretty bustling place. Trains arrived daily, bringing supplies, food, and so on. So go down, check this out. Whew. Yeah, obviously a huge snowstorm came through a few days ago. Knocked about 1 million trees down. So, all right, this is Hamilton's Crossing. Pretty exciting, huh? And you have to picture this place at the time. There'd be tents, sheds, little buildings set up. This would be a really bustling place. And like I say, it was the railhead during the winter of 62 into 63. Old Hamilton's Crossing site. And boy, yeah, trees down everywhere. You might not be able to see it, but that sign says the Mine Road. And the old Mine Road ran down and crossed over the railroad tracks. Eventually wrapped around it and met that old Richmond Stage Road. So yeah, not too much to see down here, but I guess I'm gonna head on back. And all right, to wrap things up, anybody who's watched this far into the video, thank you for watching. And so to give the aftermath of the battle, Union Army, they set up their winter quarters in Stafford. Stonewall Jackson's Corps, they had their winter encampment at Moss Creek Manor, about 10 miles south down in Caroline County. And if you've ever watched the movie Gods and Generals, they spend a lot of time there. And I would highly recommend watching that movie. Some of the dialogue is really cheesy, but the battle scenes are awesome. Whoa. And let me get through this. I'll tell you that Robert E. Lee, his winter headquarters was about 2 miles up that mine road I was just telling you about. Longstreet, he set up his winter encampment up the Telegraph Road, which is now Lafayette Boulevard, a couple miles to the west. After the battle, Burnside was ousted. General Hooker was put in, and until the Union Army, they stayed over in Stafford until about April when they began their whole headed to their Chancellorsville campaign. So anyway, all right, I'm rambling, but I'm gonna get out of here. And yeah, I think this is gonna be my last. I've covered all of the southern end of the Battle of Fredericksburg. Gonna take a little break, and then other places I want to see. And then I'm gonna eventually go up to Marie's Heights and check out all the sites on the northern end. So anyway, getting out of here, and I'll see you.